It's fantastic to see so many people turn out for this meeting, and I think it was a little Fort Knox to get in here, but here you all are, so we appreciate it. My name is Suzanne Rasmussen. I'm Director of Environmental and Transportation Planning in the City of Cambridge, and this is a joint meeting held by Watertown and the City of Cambridge. And I know some people came in, might have thought it was a state DCR meeting, but it's actually hosted by Cambridge and Watertown. So you'll hear from staff from both sides. So tonight we're talking about both an inexpensive and exciting opportunity to improve mobility and safety in the Mount Auburn Street corridor right outside where we are tonight. And this project is a collaboration of many, many agencies and government entities. So I'll do a little bit of introduction, but don't have time to tell you everyone who's here. But as I said, the City of Cambridge is a host, and we have lots of City of Cambridge people here, and if you can raise your hand. And I'll just point out Tegan Tyke, who's the project manager, and Joe Barr, who's the head of the Traffic and Parking Department. But there are many, many people involved in this project. We have a lot of folks from Watertown, and you'll hear more from one of them in a moment. But if you can also raise your hand, Watertown people. Well, Watertown staff, the city staff. And then we're really grateful to have Senator Brownsberger here. He's somewhere, there he is. And Vice Mayor Devereaux from Cambridge over there. And Jonathan Hecht is right there. Hi, John. Thank you for coming. So this is, as I said, this project, the Mount Auburn Street Bus Priority Pilot, is intended to improve conditions and safety and flow for not just buses, but actually for everyone. And you'll hear a presentation in a moment that talks about the details of it. Also involved in the project is, very importantly, the MBTA, of course, the Barr Foundation, which has funded this pilot, so very important in our ability to move forward, and the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, which is an organization that promotes bus priority and the development of very high-quality bus service throughout the country, which ultimately can lead to what's called bus rapid transit, which is sort of the gold standard of how to have superior bus service that goes beyond what this project involves, but that's what their focus is. Just specifically, we have Julia. She's down there. Julia is from ITDP, as they are called, to avoid to say the four long names. From the T, we have Wes Edwards, and I think I saw Andy Smith a while ago. There he is. And not sure if DCR is here, but DCR is here. Welcome, thank you. And we think we might have Cambridge Police, although I'm not sure I've seen Matt. Not here, okay. So, as I said earlier, I think some thought that this was a DCR meeting, and that's very understandable because there has been a lot going on in terms of looking at mobility in the Mount Auburn Street corridor that has involved the DCR and their long ongoing projects, and there have been many, many meetings about it. There has also been meetings in Watertown about bus service, and we're going to try to explain momentarily. Tegan will lay out how all these projects fit together and work together. So, but most importantly, this meeting is to get input from you. So it's wonderful that there are so many of you, and the meeting has been designed so we can get the maximum input from all of you, and you'll hear about that in a moment. So obviously your input will help us figure out how to do the implementation as well as possible, and then after the project is implemented, there will be evaluation and ongoing consideration to figure out if any design changes are needed or how the project operates before any final decision is made about the long term. So it is a pilot where we're trying to learn and figure out should it stay the way we're implementing it initially, or should it change, or or what might be needed. So just so you're aware that this is something that we're trying out, so you can give input before and during and after, and you'll hear more about that. But without going on any further, so we can get into the presentation, I'll turn it over to Matt to say a few words, and then we'll go to Tegan.
Thanks, Suzanne. My name is Matt Schumann. I'm the town engineer with the town of Watertown. First of all, I'd like to thank our project partners, particularly the Barr Foundation for funding this, City of Cambridge and the T for working with us on this project. This is a very exciting partnership for us. As we'll talk about a lot more, you know, the 71 bus crosses boundaries. It's not just Watertown, it's not just Cambridge. And I think this is probably one of the first of its kind in getting the communities together and working on kind of whole corridor-based planning. I'd also like to thank Tufts for hosting us. This is the second time I've had a meeting at Tufts, and it's a wonderful facility, and Tufts is a great partner with the town as well. We have Representative Hecht and Senator Brownsberger as well here, who have done a great job advocating for transit and other types of complete streets principles. And I would just add that from the town's perspective, as we continue with our Mount Auburn Street corridor planning, which is looking to reconstruct Mount Auburn Street from Patton Street to the Cambridge line, it's very important for us to be looking at transit, not just at the Cambridge line, where we're kind of tying in with what's going on in Cambridge on Mount Auburn Street and on Belmont Street, but again, as that corridor, looking at it as from a corridor standpoint, trying to improve service and reliability along the corridor for bus riders, which we'll talk about the number of bus riders on this corridor. It's pretty large. So I guess with that, I'll pass it off to Tegan, and she can go into more detail. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to point out that we've developed an agenda which, as I think Suzanne already said, is intended to give you a bit of an overview, but also get the most input we can from you. So my name is Tegan Tyke. I work for City of Cambridge, but we've all been working very closely together, as should already be obvious. And I'm going to give you the quick presentation. It's going to stay at a little bit of a high level. There are actually in the room next to us, when we're done with the presentation and some sort of clarification Q&A from you, there are actual plans and designs and more detailed information that you can take a look at on paper. And at each of the tables over there are going to be multiple staff people who can answer questions from the T, from the municipalities, and from others. So just keep that in mind, that this is an overview, and then we want to get much more input from you in that format. So I will try to keep to 30 minutes. As I mentioned, we'll probably go a few minutes late overall for the meeting since we started a little bit late as well. And let me know if at any point you can't hear me. So for the presentation, I'm first going to talk a little bit about all of these planning projects that have been mentioned, to try to be clear what it is we're talking about tonight and how this relates to the other work. Then I will talk about the Mount Auburn Street Bus Priority Pilot, which is in fact why we are here tonight. And I will touch on why we're doing it, what the concept will look like at a high level, what the expected outcomes are for all users on the street, and then also a little bit about the process and the evaluation, so you can be assured that this is an ongoing thing that we're looking at and thinking about with you. And then I'm going to quickly summarize what the stations for that small group input I mentioned, what's at each of those tables, so that you know before you start to ask questions what you'll be able to talk about there. So let's get started. So the planning projects that are going on in the area, there are quite a few. I'm going to put this map up and talk about it for a while, and I'm going to put it back up because I think there's a lot to process there. But what I want to point out here are a few different projects to orient you. Let me see if this pointer will work for me. That is Fresh Pond. This is Fresh Pond Parkway. This is Mount Auburn Street. Harvard Square is over here. Watertown Square is down here. And this is Belmont Street going up into Belmont and off into Waverly Square. So hopefully that's a relatively good orientation. This gray outline here, the first project at the top, is meant to indicate the study area that was the focus for the Department of Conservation and Recreation, the DCR, what was called the Mount Auburn Street Corridor Study. Now, it's important to note that this roadway is owned by DCR, and the signals, Fresh Pond Parkway is owned by DCR, and the signals are owned by DCR. But they included in their study some city-owned roadway and city-owned signals because we all realized that it was a hard thing to think about them in isolation. We have a lot of people trying to get across this way and get across Fresh Pond Parkway, and in some ways, because of the challenges on Fresh Pond Parkway, it serves as a barrier between these two parts of Cambridge and beyond. So that study took place over 2016 and 17. It's essentially complete. It had a large stakeholder group involved in it that met 7 times, 3 separate public meetings. In addition, the city hosted an additional neighborhood meeting for Strawberry Hill residents who didn't feel like they had been as plugged into the process as they would have liked to have been throughout. So we worked pretty hard to make it pretty inclusive, and the outcome was both long-term and short-term recommendations. Another key thing to note is that I think there were some very excellent recommendations made. Any of the recommendations that are on a city-owned facility would then have to go through a city process to be able to be implemented. So I've received a lot of questions about that sort of thing, so I just want to make sure it's clear. So that's what we are moving towards now, is thinking about some of the shorter term recommendations and what we can do. So next I want to point out this sort of red section here, and then the blue section, which is the real topic of tonight. This red section here is the area that is the focus of a DCR short-term design implementation to do some of the improvements they were talking about. So I'll talk about it in a little more detail, but I will say again that DCR is here tonight, so if you have kind of nitty-gritty or detailed questions about that project, you should definitely talk to them about it. Our project, the city project and DCR project are linked together. We need to implement them together, so that's another part of this sort of collaboration that's going on right now. This blue section is the Watertown, Cambridge, Boston BRT, Mount Auburn Street Bus Priority Pilot. Sorry, that was a mouthful. So that's the project we're really here to talk about tonight, and it's a pilot to implement some of the near-term recommendations, particularly for transit improvements, but that should also improve the roadway for all of the users. For those of you who don't take the bus, this will also hopefully affect and improve the situation for everyone, and I will definitely talk more about that later. The orange and yellow ones here, I have slides for that I'll show you, but these are the longer-term reconstruction projects that are coming up. The orange is Belmont Street in Cambridge, and it includes a little bit of Holworthy Street that will help improve connections to the upcoming Watertown Cambridge Greenway. And then the yellow is the Watertown Mount Auburn Complete Streets Reconstruction Project. So the Belmont Street work will probably be done, we expect it to be done in 2021, and then the Watertown work will start in 2022. So just to briefly talk about those projects, and then we'll move away from them and move on to the project of tonight. I did want to mention, this might be a little hard to see in this light, but this is the Belmont Street project within the city of Cambridge, and this will involve new sidewalks and paving, improved accessibility, considering the needs of all of the users, restriping of the roadway. It is a more significant reconstruction project than what we're talking about tonight. That design is intended to really get underway after this pilot goes into place so that it can inform the discussion that we have around that longer term design. So we do have one of the DPW contacts here for that, Dan Valley, and so he will also be at one of the tables to be able to answer your questions about that upcoming project. And then we have the Watertown work, which I should not speak too much for Watertown, but I will just give you a quick overview and you can ask Watertown staff more about this. But there's 2 sort of separate pieces of this. There's this bigger Mount Auburn Street Complete Streets reconstruction that focuses on making the entire corridor safer for all users. It's looking at traffic calming while maintaining the capacity, the actual capacity for vehicles on the roadway. So not necessarily making it harder to drive, but improving safety overall. But also at the same time promoting these alternative modes of transportation, such as walking, biking, and public transit to sort of contribute towards decreasing congestion. So the design is currently underway. There's this parallel process going on in some ways, but the construction is anticipated in 2022, so that's a little ways off. There's also kind of with that, there are going to be some Watertown Square improvements, and so there's the website for both of these projects. And again, I would suggest that you talk to Watertown staff after this presentation if you want to learn more. So that's the big picture. Just to remind you, we're really here to talk mostly about this blue pilot project here that's meant to happen this summer, late this summer, and that's going to be happening in conjunction with the DCR short-term design changes. So let's talk about the Mount Auburn Bus Priority Pilots. One step back, I think it's really important to remind ourselves of the context of why we're doing these kinds of projects and how we got to this kind of plan. So both municipalities have policies in place that lead to this. I want to emphasize that the city of Cambridge, since the 90s, have had policies in place that recognize that, congestion increasing, it's hard, there's not really an effective way to accommodate it unless you also make it easier and safer and more comfortable to walk, bike, and take public transit to sort of accommodate as many trips as possible. So the Vehicle Trip Reduction Ordinance and the Cambridge Growth Policy both really try to set a groundwork for encouraging these other modes of transportation and also creating lower emission vehicles on the roads. In addition, more recently, in 2016 and 2017, Cambridge and Watertown formalized complete streets policies, which is work that we've been doing, I think, for a long time, but it really formalizes the fact that when we do our design and reconstruction projects, we are thinking about all people of all abilities, all ages, and on any mode of transportation, and trying to design streets that are comfortable for everyone to use. That doesn't mean that the streets all end up looking the same. The design can look different in different contexts, but we are thinking about all of those things in every design that we do and in every construction project that we do. And then in 2016, Cambridge also formalized a Vision Zero policy, which is fundamental in so much work we do. It has to do with safety. And the idea is that we are calling for the elimination of all traffic fatalities as well as serious injuries that result from traffic crashes. And the idea is that they can be prevented. So what do we do to prevent them? And design is one piece of that. I also just want to make sure that it's clear that there are many plans in place that identify the Mount Auburn corridor as a very important corridor. We have a transit strategic plan, we have a bike plan, we have a pedestrian plan. So these things all kind of call out this corridor as a critical connection for people. So even if you don't take public transit, I want to emphasize to everybody why public transit and particularly buses are so important. So the region is growing, this we know. It's growing economically, and this is great for everyone, but as a result, one of the things that's happening is that traffic regionally is growing. There are some places where there's been a lot of development with not a lot of growth in traffic, and that tends to be where there is good walking, biking, and transit options to help accommodate as many of those trips that can be accommodated that way. Public transit itself is one of the most efficient ways to sort of capture that kind of growth in a way that's efficient, that doesn't take up a ton more space, that doesn't add to congestion, that doesn't make it more difficult for people who have been driving in the area forever to sort of continue to do that if they need to do that. We already predict that there's going to be a 30% increase in transit trips, and so we as the city, we work with the T, we work with others to try to figure out the best way to accommodate that kind of growth that we're already predicting in transit, and we also want to capture more growth in transit as much as we can. So bus service in particular is the most local kind of service. It serves our neighborhoods more directly than, say, subway lines or others do, particularly in Watertown. It's, obviously the main transit service. It's also, in a sense, the easiest to expand, meaning it's the cheapest. Easy is in quotes because it's still not easy. There's still a lot of investment that needs to happen. And it's also the type of service that suffers from the most delay and reliability challenges because it's on our streets, using our signals, and the rest of the congestion on the streets. So it's easy, but it's not easy. But there are these national movements to make bus feel more like the quality of service that rail can feel like. And so I just want to highlight this, that sort of at an international level, there's this movement to try to improve bus service to this sort of gold standard where there's new clean buses that can fit a lot of people on them, where there's dedicated space for them, almost as though they're operating on rail, where the stations are enclosed and secure. You can pay before you get on the bus. You can board at a level point, so you can roll wheelchairs, for example, or strollers on and off the bus very easily, and then high-quality, non-motorized pedestrian and bike access to those stations. So that's part of where this grant comes from, is to work with municipalities to see what parts of this we can implement in our context. I will point out that pretty close to this type of bus service has been implemented in the US and can be implemented in a lot of contexts in the US. This is an example of Healthline in Cleveland, Ohio, that's been pretty successful. And in the Boston region, we've been seeing more and more of these pilots that have been coming up, which is similar to what we're trying to do here, but different. For example, in Roslindale and in Everett, there's been this attempt to, in the peak hours, during the rush hour, put some cones out, restrict that space for parking or for general vehicular traffic, and let the buses get around congestion there. And there's been a lot of successful outcomes for that, and people really feel like the service is improved. The other thing that does is take the buses out of general traffic, meaning they're not coming up to the stops and blocking traffic, so the other sort of lanes of traffic can kind of move a little more consistently next to them. The Somerville pilot is one that was done probably a little closer to what we're trying to do with, flex posts and paint and actual more than cones. So, the Cambridge Watertown pilot, sorry it took me a while to get here, but the idea is to implement recommendations from the DCR study, particularly the shorter-term recommendations, to test and refine a design that's going to make bus travel in particular more reliable, faster, and more predictable overall. It will also focus on some improvements that will enhance safety for people walking and cycling on the corridor, and also overall for drivers. The way we're looking at trying to restripe the roadway should clarify where people should be and want to be, and clarify left turns, and make it so the flow should actually be a little smoother. And I've driven out there, I'm sure many of you or most people in the room have. There's a lot of jockeying back and forth for positions on the road. That creates conflict, that slows the flow down. It's also just really frustrating. So we're trying to address a lot of those things in our design. And we'd love to hear your feedback where we've missed the mark or can make more improvements, those sorts of things. We think that because of the joint work with DCR, we're going to keep travel times about the same, not worse. Not significantly worse for people who drive, while making it hopefully significantly better for people on buses. And I'll explain that more in a minute. And then, of course, as I mentioned, one of the goals is to inform these longer-term reconstruction projects. So the location of the pilot most specifically, so we're back to geography here with the Fresh Pond Parkway, right, with Fresh Pond and the cemetery. This is Watertown Square and the 71 coming in, and then the 73 coming in from Belmont. And they meet together in this middle section, and this is really the core focus for this pilot. Most of it's in Cambridge. There's this section in Watertown, and then Watertown is looking at a couple of sort of spot improvements further down Mount Auburn Street. At this point in the roadway, we have about 19,000 vehicles per day. We also have, just on the 71 and 73, about 12,000 daily passenger trips. And then if you start adding to that all of the Mount Auburn Hospital shuttles, the Bentley shuttles, the Athena Health shuttles, that number of people that are on that roadway in buses keeps going up. And one thing to really highlight is that in the morning peak in particular, you will find that even though the MBTA buses take up this tiny portion of space on the roadway, there are a tiny number of the vehicles actually using the roadway, they are moving more than half of the people at a point on this corridor. So getting them through more efficiently, consistently, better, and hopefully in the future providing more capacity moves a lot of people and makes the whole roadway work a lot better for everyone. I want to emphasize too, this is kind of, just note this in terms of color coding. This is Aberdeen, this is Belmont and Mount Auburn Street coming together here in Fresh Pond Parkway. We did some data analysis using MBTA data and found that this is one of the locations in the city with the worst problems for bus reliability and delay challenges. So it is a hot spot that we have been wanting to try to help and address. So the concept is to pilot bus priority west of Fresh Pond Parkway. By pilot, we mean minimal or no construction. Sort of quick build is another term that's often used. The idea is using paint, maybe some things like flex post, signal changes, signal upgrades, and a lot of education and enforcement, including the police being out there initially educating people and then making sure people actually follow the rules that are on the street. There isn't a specific, there's an implementation time frame, but it's not that it's going to be out there for 2 weeks and go away. It's going to be done with paint, something that will fade over time, probably over the winter, but it's not going to be cones that go out for a morning and then go away again. So the idea is to put it into place, evaluate it thoroughly, make changes if we need to, and then figure out what we want to do for the long term after that. The features that are going to be included is an all-day shared bus bike lane in the eastbound direction, which is toward Harvard, mostly in the Cambridge portion, and signal priority to help the buses sort of get in front of queues where the bus lane might drop. And also in the short section of Watertown, actually bus lanes in both directions is what we're looking at doing. And in Cambridge, also westbound and going up to Belmont Street, we think we can stripe in also a bike lane in that direction where it's mixed-use traffic directly next to the bike lane. So again, I'm just going to keep mentioning this has to be done in conjunction with DCR short-term design, and that involves sort of minor construction, but definitely construction at Fresh Pond Parkway and signal changes that's going to improve traffic flow overall on Mount Auburn Street and also make some significant improvements for bicycle and pedestrian safety. And you will be able to also see that plan tonight. The existing conditions for most of this is essentially 2 lanes of travel in each direction. So there's not really parking to contend with. As you get further onto Mount Auburn Street and Belmont Street, there is parking at the curb, but we think we can do this with minimal to no impacts on parking. So it's not really a question of parking, it's a question of how we can make traffic flow to make this work. The DCR project is, as I mentioned, what makes that happen. It makes it possible. So again, the plans are over there. I didn't want to try to speak to DCR's plan myself. But what I do want to show is this is the existing conditions. This is Fresh Pond Parkway. This is Mount Auburn Street. Coolidge Ave is right here. And again, those of you who are familiar with the area know that this is a massive intersection to get across by any mode. It's terrifying, I think. It doesn't matter if you have a car wrapped around you, it's still terrifying. There are crashes and conflicts. So the idea that DCR has is to bring these stop lines sort of further out and tighten up this intersection in a way that allows more traffic to queue here and then get through the intersection more efficiently. And that really improves the flow on Mount Auburn Street in a way that allows us to then think about reallocating space for the buses. There are also some pedestrian and bicycle improvements to make the crossing safer and more comfortable and faster. But again, I will encourage you, if you have questions about that, to go and look at the plan and ask questions about that more specifically. But with that smoother flow on Mount Auburn Street, again, these Google Maps kind of fade, sorry, but this is Fresh Pond Parkway, and this is Mount Auburn Street, and then it splits into Belmont Street and Mount Auburn Street. This is the concept, these sort of eastbound queue jump for the buses, and then this long section here leading up to Coolidge Ave that allows the buses to get ahead of the queue to go across Fresh Pond Parkway. We think we'd be able to do probably 2 lanes, or bus lanes in both directions in the Watertown section, and then, as I mentioned, stripe a bike lane in this westbound direction where bikes will still be next to mixed traffic. It drops in the middle, and that's actually really important. We may like to have a consistent facility all the way through, but there is a lot of left turn movements that are happening here. And if you did the bus lane through here and only had one through lane, then you would have people trapped behind the left turners. So we're not doing that. We're keeping the through traffic flowing in mixed traffic with buses for this section, and the left turn lanes very clearly defined to help reduce some of the conflicts that happen now. I also want to mention that we're taking a careful look at what to do at this Brattle Street merge that creates a lot of conflicts and delay in the outbound direction. And we have some ideas how to test how to restripe that to organize that much better and provide people better access in and out of the driveways and the buildings that are there, and also allow Mount Auburn Street to flow better and then reduce some of that weaving traffic that happens because some people want to go right, some people want to go left. So it should help clarify that. And then further down, in Watertown, there's this concept of at Walnut Street and at School Street doing a sort of joint right turn lane queue jump for the buses that would actually get longer in the peak hours because parking would be restricted, at least in the morning peak. And right turns on red would be allowed that would hopefully allow sort of traffic to flow through there and the buses to move. So again, I would encourage you to talk to Watertown staff for more specifics on that. But I want to quickly summarize the expected outcomes of this pilot. So I'll also take a minute on this. So this was done in the DCR process. So this was traffic modeling that was done as part of that long 2-year process that already happened. And what they did is they took a look at the expected impacts of these changes in a modeling format. And so then they, take it with a grain of salt in the sense that modeling is a very useful tool to estimate things like the scale of impact and what we think it's going to look like. However, it's still a model, and so we still have to see what this actually looks like when we do it on the ground. But what is incredibly impressive is if you look at the results for buses on the left side here, you have the average in the 90th percentile, you see an expected improvement in that eastbound direction in the morning of minutes, which is really significant when you're talking about bus travel. And in fact, what I think is extra important is if you ever ride the bus on the corridor, which I also do, sometimes you're sitting in that traffic for 10 minutes and not a few minutes. And what this will help do, these bus lanes, is sort of reduce those extreme cases because there's a reliable space for the buses to be in, and there are less instances where sort of other things happening are going to so dramatically impact the buses. It's still always possible there's going to be a broken down vehicle in the bus lane or other things, but it still shouldn't bring it back up to 10, 15 minutes like it can sometimes be today. And it also makes the buses run more reliably, so the T can do better sort of planning on how the buses are going to operate. The modeling showed this sort of estimated potential impact in the outbound direction, the westbound direction towards Watertown that might slow things down by a few seconds. I'd really like to see how that plays out because I think that with the changes we're looking at on Brattle Street, we'll reduce a lot of the conflict and hopefully keep things flowing pretty well in that direction. So that's something we want to kind of keep a close eye on. But the scale of this is much smaller. And so, again, it's kind of take it a little bit with a grain of salt. And in the vehicle, sort of the private auto, if you're driving alone or driving with somebody or family in a car in this corridor, the expectation is that it still might get a bit faster in that inbound direction. Everybody's going to benefit from that eastbound direction and the changes at Fresh Pond Parkway. I also have some people comment about concerns about narrowing down lanes, and I want to make one point extremely clear, which is that multiple wide lanes encourage faster speeds. Faster speeds are not something that we are trying to promote. When we say the buses will go faster, the intent is not that they'll be going at 45 miles per hour. It's that instead of an average 2 mile per hour speed, they'll be going at an average 10 mile per hour speed. The idea is, so City of Cambridge has a 25 mile per hour citywide speed limit. We really don't want people going faster than that. We want them moving consistently and traffic to flow, but not for people to be speeding down sections of the road. So narrowing lanes is a very effective way of trying to reduce travel speeds and having people be a little bit more aware of their environment, and generally leads to improved safety for everyone. It's also going to help people crossing the street, trying to get across this sort of like big, right now, just 4 wide lanes. The graphic here at the bottom right is to emphasize the fact that if you are a pedestrian trying to cross the street on Mount Auburn Street and a vehicle hits you, if it's going 40 miles per hour, you have only a 10% chance of survival. If it hits you at 30 miles per hour, your chances improve to about 50-50. If you get hit by someone going 20 miles per hour, your chances of surviving are 90%. These are statistics, but these are really powerful to understand the impact of speed and on safety. So please, some people do get concerned about narrow lanes, this is why we do it. The other question I get a lot is, again, as I've tried to allude to numerous times, I don't take the bus, what about me? And I just kind of want to remind people that by accommodating growth through public transit, we're sort of trying to deal with this congestion and growth in the region in the most effective way we can. I want to emphasize again that we don't think the travel time by vehicle will be dramatically impacted in any way, and we think that the flow will work better and it'll be safer for everyone the way that this design will work. We also have been talking a lot. We had another Strawberry Hill neighborhood meeting, and we're very interested in trying to make sure we understand issues getting in and out of side streets and neighborhood streets and maintaining that access without encouraging additional cut-through traffic. So that's a big goal of this design, and if anybody has concerns about that, please communicate that to us at the tables, and we want to make sure we're thinking about that. We're also paying very close attention to accommodating left turns at some of these major streets like Aberdeen and Brattle, but also on side streets like Holworthy. How do we try to accommodate left turns in a way that doesn't hold up the other flow of traffic? In terms of process, I just want to emphasize this. It's a relatively quick process, about 6 months to hopefully get this in the ground from start to finish, but it's, again, building off of years of public work that's already been done. We've been doing a lot of work, January, February, March, really meeting with individual stakeholders, doing a lot of internal stakeholder work, having a neighborhood meeting with Strawberry Hill residents as the city. In parallel, Watertown has had a transit meeting as part of their Mount Auburn Complete Streets project, and they have another open house coming up a few weeks from now, that the date and the time, 4 to 7 p.m. at the Hosmer Elementary School on May 14th. That's coming up as well. So we've had a couple of parallel things going on in terms of public process. We've also been gathering data. There's going to be an evaluation of part of this, and we have a table also focused on that. So the idea is that we will implement, hopefully late in the summer, at the same time as the DCR project is completed. And then immediately after implementation, hopefully when the traffic is still light, we'll be able to do an initial evaluation and really figure out, is this working? What are the impacts to people in sort of a more immediate sense? And then as the fall comes and traffic picks back up again, I'm sure you all know it's a dramatically different story in terms of congestion in the summertime versus the fall. We can do a much more thorough evaluation looking at data to really understand whether we've achieved the benefits that we hope to achieve. So there's this sort of 2-phased evaluation process. So I'm going to certainly open it up for a bit of clarification Q&A, and I'm going to try to push more substantive comments to these stations that we have in this next room for more detailed and thorough input, and also where you can have much more detailed conversations with the staff people who might know the most about what your questions are trying to address or get at. The stations that we have over there, if you guys have your agendas, we roughly laid it out. The table shapes are a little different than what you see on the page, but that kind of shows you where each table is supposed to be, so you can sort of enter from either side and go where you want to go. Station 1, which is towards this side of the room, we want to have an overall sort of transit service table. Let's talk about bus service. If you care about this sort of high quality standard and sort of, even more progressive changes in terms of improving transit in the city, if you want to learn about the MBTA's bus service planning process, which is also happening in parallel, and if you want to look at details about, what the ridership is, where people are getting on and off at stops on the routes, where bus stops are located, and also learn more about transit signal priority, provide input on that, this is your table. If you want to think about how are you measuring the success of this project, What data points are you looking at? What kinds of surveys are you going to do? How are you going to get my input on this? That's really focused on Station 2, which is also at the front of this room. I bullet pointed out here just an example of a lot of the different ways we're looking at evaluating the project, and just a reminder that we're trying to do this in 2 phases, so keep that in mind. Then we get to the design. So we have 4 tables set up with different sections of the road, which you can sort of filter through them in order or out of order, however you would prefer. So we have the first section, the first table, table 3, is Watertown. This will primarily Watertown staff will be, so it'll be the Watertown-owned section plus School Street and Walnut Street, and the queue jumps there. Table 4 will be the Cambridge-owned portion of Belmont Street, and sort of going up to the Star Market and Homer Ave. I know some people have, oh, sorry, no, that's actually the next one. No, it is that one, I'm sorry. So if you have questions about access into and out of Star Market and those sorts of things, or on Belmont Street, again, we don't expect very much impact to parking. We're trying to maintain the access in and out of side streets there. That's your table to go talk about those issues. Table 5 has sort of the Aberdeen and Brattle intersections, so where there's a lot of left turns, there's a lot of conflicts coming out of Brattle. That's where you can see those plans. And then table 6 is going to be that last portion that's pretty consistent. It's mostly just a bus lane, but then it will also have the DCR plans for Fresh Pond Parkway. So go to table 6 if you want to learn more about that. We'll try to give you time updates so that you have a chance to circulate around, and hopefully you can spread yourselves out a bit amongst the tables knowing you can circulate. But that is the plan. So I know that was a lot at once. I'm happy to answer clarification questions, and then I would love for you guys to really spend time talking about this stuff in the nitty-gritty details with all the staff that are here. So do we have any questions first? Yeah? Yeah, sorry, we'll use the mic.
Hi. I have a question about the bike traffic. So on the portion of Mount Auburn east of Brattle, the plan right now is to have the bikes with the bus in the bus lane.
Yep.
There is also a quite wide sidewalk parallel along the cemetery there. Is there some reason why that can't be turned into a dedicated bike path?
Right.
Or a shared, walking and pedestrian?
So before people get too worked up about it, I would say that this, because in order to do that at all, we'd have to do more, there'd have to be construction, because it may seem wide, but when there's a pedestrian and a cyclist next to each other, it does not feel wide, particularly for the pedestrian who's typically moving at a slower pace, right, than a cyclist. Also, there's a lot of trees interspersed and some issues with the sidewalk at various levels, and so that's not really a part of the scope of this project. Yep.
Is the reason it's not a scope is because it would cost money to make it right?
The reason it's not part of the scope is it's sort of a scale of work that is different than what's being looked at. Yeah. What else? Any other clarification questions before we get into input? No? Oh, a couple more? Okay, Arthur, and then we'll go.
Could you speak a little bit to schedule in the summer? I'm sorry. Could you speak a little bit to schedule in the summer? The first work I would imagine was DCR. If they're here, can they say something about their plan?
Definitely. Go to table 6. DCR will be there, and ask them for more details about that, for sure. Right now, the expectation is late summer, and that's what we're working towards. And that's the information we have to date, and we've been communicating with them a lot over the past few weeks, trying to nail that down and make sure that we're moving forward as planned. So, sir, what was yours?
I'm just curious to whether you have had any, made any effort to have stakeholders in this, going to this process who live on Mount Auburn Street. The DCR stakeholders did not include a single person who lived on Mount Auburn Street between Aberdeen Avenue and Fresh Pond Parkway.
Right. I don't want to speak to who was on the DCR stakeholder group exactly, but we don't have a sort of a separate stakeholder group for this. We have reached out a lot individually to various stakeholders along the corridors, and we flyered every single house, as some people here can personally attest to, about this meeting and information about the project, and we will continue to do that, sort of flyering, going door to door as we get closer to implementation as well. For the clarification question, or?
But this idea is not new. This was part of
Yep.
the past presentation.
You mean the DCR work? The DCR presentation? You're not talking about the
Yeah,
city meeting?
this business of creating bus lanes. the only bus lane in the city and probably the only one that can be constructed in the city of Cambridge because Mount Auburn, or at least not along Mount Auburn Street, because we've already gone into traffic quieting and narrowed the street in a number of places. You're going to rip up that stuff too?
So I'm going to suggest that you consider looking a little more into the details at the evaluation table and talking about what you think would better define whether this project is successful or not, and that would be very helpful for us to hear from you. So let's keep on going through some clarification questions, and I'll push you guys to have more detailed conversations like that over there. Yes, ma'am?
So you made a point to emphasize this was a pilot.
Yeah.
And that you were looking to reassess after collecting data and input and whatnot. At the end of the pilot, is the point of the assessment to make adjustments to the pilot and what will be implemented, or is there also an option that this does not work and so nothing is, like, what would happen afterwards?
Everything, all of those things are possible. In paint, essentially, it will fade over the wintertime, and a next step has to be made either to keep what's there in place or to change it. So there's not that it can just sit there and it'll just stay there forever as though, we just sort of started to ignore it and decided not to do anything about it. It will fade. So there needs to be next steps, either to refresh that paint, put down thermo that's more permanent, rearrange it again based on what people's input is. So we really want to make sure we talk to you guys about what you think. We also, hopefully you'll see that we have, I think, a lot of input that we're gathering in terms of data and also surveys and talking to people who live in the area. But I would love your input on more things to measure that. But it is paint and it will fade, and something has to be decided about what to do as the next step. So, yeah. Yeah, I think I would love your input and opinion on that. We haven't planned anything sort of formal as in like an ongoing process. I think we have to talk to you guys about what we found. It's not going to be something that we just, assess and keep internally. So if you have ideas on how you think that would be most effective, we'd love to hear them. There is a public process in terms of doing surveys and gathering data. There hasn't been a decision as to what sort of format communicating that back to folks takes, what sort of format that's going to take. So that's what I would love to hear your input on as to how it might be easiest to sort of get a handle of that information. I mean, it's easy for us to do things like email out a lot of information or updates to people who sign up for the project list, but do you think there's more we should be doing? I want to emphasize that we've had a lot of ongoing conversations with folks and we'll continue to do so. And so we're not afraid of doing that. It's just sort of how does it best work for everyone? Okay, any last clarification question? And then I'll try to move you guys over that way to talk to people. Anything else? Oh, okay, in the back, and we'll move over. Yeah.
I live on Aberdeen, and I know cars make that illegal left all the time.
Yep.
As long as there's not a police officer sitting right there watching it. So I could just imagine it's going to be very tempting for cars just to poke into the bus lane.
Right. That's one of the biggest challenges of these kinds of things, and why there's this idea of this sort of more gold standard BRT out there where you actually have it so vehicles can't get into the bus lane because it's completely separated. We're not there yet, so what we're going to rely on is part of this grant involves making sure that we have resources available to get police out there, especially at the beginning, primarily for education, because this is also a different and new kind of facility for a lot of people, and then for enforcement. And there are ways in which there's going to be a lot of buses in the bus lane and it can kind of self-enforce, but I agree that the enforcement is sort of an ongoing challenge that we have to think about how to work with the police to get enough resources to sort of reinforce that, that treatment. So, okay, last one maybe? Oh, two more. Yeah.
The bus signals, are they going to be coordinated? I mean, the traffic signals, are they going to be coordinated to the buses? Because I live on Aberdeen, and I cannot, a lot of times that bus is coming down the street. I cannot get across to get the bus going into Harvard Square.
Gotcha, yeah.
So that's a real problem on the Aberdeen section there.
Yep.
So there's got to be a way, if the bus is in a bus lane and it's traveling, at a good rate down the street there, that the person that's trying to get across the street needs to be able to have that traffic light coordinated. I know in Fresh Pond Parkway, when you press that button, within 5 seconds, the light changes.
Right. So
I
you're thinking
understand
particularly about
it's
the
a little
pedestrian
more
crossing,
complicated.
right? The pedestrian crossing.
Right.
I will say that you should definitely talk to traffic and parking staff that are here about details where you think it's not working well. Part of this project is to update signal timing and make sure all those pedestrian buttons are working and make it sort of an improvement so that pedestrians can get across the street more easily. So if you want sort of more details in that, I would suggest you talk to some of our people who work on the signals all the time. And yes, the intent is to sort of improve that experience for people trying to get across the street and have it be more responsive. And then one last one, and then we'll shift over.
Thank you. If one is coming down Mount Auburn Street going towards Harvard Square,
Yep.
and you're in the car lane, but you need to turn right on Coolidge Avenue,
Yep.
what happens? That's a bus lane. At what point are you legally allowed to cross in, or do you stop all the traffic behind you that wants to go forward? What happens?
No, that's a really good clarification question. And so definitely take a look at the design. The way that it is laid out, and this is a very typical treatment with these kinds of bus lanes, and the same thing that will happen in Watertown, this sort of the spot treatments I showed, is that the right turning traffic shares the bus lane. At a certain point, there's an indication through signage and also often through breaks in the red paint, so it becomes dashed and a dashed line that communicates to drivers that they can move over into that bus lane and take a right. And there's also, the police are going to help people understand that, and then there's also sort of legislation that it enforces that that's a place that cars can be. So we want to make sure it's as clearly communicated as possible, but we understand there's concerns about it being confusing or unclear about what people should be. And so we want to make sure we understand what all those potential issues, I mean, we know that's one potential issue. There might be others out there that we're not thinking of that we can really try to address as upfront as possible and figure out how it's working when we first do it. And that's the opportunity, again, when traffic's lighter, if we can get this done in the summertime, we can assess those kinds of issues and try to fix them or really educate people to use it correctly before it gets really busy out there and you're really causing a huge, traffic backup from the confusion. So with that said, that's a perfect segue into people who might want to look at the design and some of the other details. So again, filter through the front if you want some more of this sort of transit high-level stuff, and maybe filter through the back if you want some of the design details. And talk to staff, we all have name tags.